Classic Restos is proudly brought to you by Shannons, insurance for motoring enthusiasts, Hare and Forbes Machinery House, and Pace Farm. This episode features two guys. The first is regarding a classic car barn find, and the second is a bike restoration of a different kind. I'm Fletch, and this is Classic Restos. Back in 1960, the XK Falcon was among the first of an all-new, sleek, low-look style. The FB Holden, well, it was aging by comparison. We were into the 1960s and the Holden still had a 1950s look. The Falcon took it on, highlighting a new benchmark. The Falcon spanned 7 generations, ending up as the longest-running production by Ford Australia.
Yes, I went up to Classic Falcon Spares in Collector in New South Wales, and Wayne Whiting that owns the business. So I had to go up and pick up some parts for a car that we were working on in the business. And I walked into his shed and this black Falcon was sitting there, and just casually asked him what he was doing with it. And he said that he'd spent about 9 years looking for one. He'd picked it up about 10 years earlier and it had sat in the shed ever since. He hadn't had time to do anything with it, and said that if I was interested he would probably sell it to me. So we had a bit of a look over the car, couldn't believe the condition it was in. Actually said to him on the day, look, if you can just hold on to that, I need to go home and talk to my wife, which I did. Brought some photos home and she just said to me, ring him up, send him a deposit and let's do it. So we, a week later, drove up with the car trailer. The car had sat for 10 years in the shed, so the brakes were locked on. It hadn't started in that time, the fuel was stale. So we simply got the wheels freed up, pushed it outside, brought it onto the trailer and covered in dust, like a pure barn find that people like to use these days, and brought the car home. So by that afternoon we had the fuel tank out, systems flushed, wheels freed up, and just basically pulled the car down to go right through things like the fuel system, the brakes. All the interior in the car had actually been changed over to an XM interior, so we pulled all that out, and luckily all the original interior for the car came with it, so we put all of that back in. So we basically had a 3-week window because we knew that the Early Falcon Nationals were coming up in Nagambie in Victoria, and I think at that point we just made the decision to say we're going. So we gave ourselves 3 weeks to get the car running, cleaned up, registered and drivable. I think before we actually left for the Nationals, we'd done about 8 kilometres in the car. So it was loaded on the trailer, towed down to Victoria, and we just had a blast driving it around all weekend. It's been such a fun car to drive. It's created so much attention. It's just such an original, honest little car. Yeah, just very, very lucky to have found it. So yeah, so the car it's a 12th month 1960 Falcon, so it's a fairly early production car. It has a few differences from the later XKs. So the skirts in the engine bay are slightly different. The radiator support's different. It has the old glass bowl carburetor on it. So there's quite a few things on it that were very early production. Yeah, so I guess the love for early Falcons came from, I think there's some photographs of me in there. I'm sitting on a plastic tricycle and in the background is my parents' XK Falcon wagon. So we've had a lot of Falcons in my family growing up. My first car that I ever restored was a 63 Falcon Ute. I bought it here locally and drove it around for a little while as it was, and then eventually pulled it down, and I ended up rebuilding that car twice. The Early Falcons are just a great fun car. We're a member of the Early Falcon Car Club of New South Wales, and to get out and drive these cars on the open road, they're just such a simple, enjoyable car. It's such a quiet car. It's not as spacious as you would think. You think of a Falcon as being a large car, but yeah, certainly it's not. Inside is rather tight. When it comes to performance, it's not a vehicle that you're going to race to where you're going. It's a 144 cubic inch engine in it. This one, through the body number, tells me that it's a high compression 144 motor that's in it. I'm not sure what difference that makes, but it's certainly not a lot. With the 2-speed automatic in the car, yeah, it's a cruising vehicle. It's as you say, 144 cubic inches, however not a heavy car. So out on the highway it'll sit in 100 kilometres an hour all day long. It'll do that easily. If you look at the Early Falcon, when this came out in 1960 and you compare it to the other vehicles that were on the market at the time, they were still dated way back into the 50s, and then this car's come out and it's sleek, it's low, sits nice and squat on the road. It would have been like something a bit out of the future. It's just so far in advance of what the 1959 model cars were at the time. If we go from we've got an early Ford Custom line as well, you go from that car that ran right up to 59 to this, the two cars are chalk and cheese. They're no similarity at all. This car is so far in front in the way it's constructed, the way it's put together and the way it drives. It's not a car, I haven't driven it long distance yet, we haven't had it all that long. So fuel economy wise, I'm really not sure what it does, but it's not something that worries us. I'm sure with the 144 and the two-speed auto behind it, as I said, it's cruising, it's not doing big revs. So fuel economy wise, I think, if you're worried about fuel economy, you bought the wrong car. We're ecstatic to get the car. It's not something I'd actually planned to buy, it was a spur of the moment thing, but it's a little car, it's just so honest, so genuine, so much fun that we've just fallen in love with it. Once we got it home and got it back together, of course the first thing we did was ring Shannons and get some insurance on it. And that's been a godsend with all the fires that have been around lately, so we know we don't have to worry about that side of it. But yeah, it's just been an absolute pleasure to own.
I knew she was the one. The heart's going a million miles an hour, the mouth's dry. It's love, mate. Pure and simple. In '71, this was the fastest four-door car in the world. Back then you could pick one up for a bit over $4,000. Insurance, it's got to be Shannons.
No one knows your passion like Shannons. And with our multi-vehicle discount, you can even cover your daily drive. So call Shannons on 13 46 46. Shannons, insurance for motoring enthusiasts.
In 2020, why not consider a Detroit tour with Fletch? Detroit, the automotive epicentre. It will leave you gobsmacked. Imagine experiencing where automotive history on a grand scale began. Stay in fine accommodation, taking in some of the best museums and private car collections on the planet. Book your 2020 Detroit tour with Fletch. Darren, the very thought of a barn find excites me. It doesn't really matter about the brand, it's just another vehicle saved.
Look, I think you're right, Fletch. I think the word barn find is probably a little bit overused these days. Anything with a bit of dust on it gets the word barn find. The barn this one came out of was a pretty clean tin shed, but it had been there for a long time and had a lot of dust on it, so we'll claim the barn find.
I remember the sales brochures for 1960, not that I was around then, but I remember seeing the sales brochures. Trim, taut and terrific. That was the three words that they gave to the Falcon when it first came out. And as you mentioned earlier as well, sleek, low, a compact sized car and a very new shape. The 50s cars still had the high roof lines, high bonnet lines. They really went into a new realm when they designed this first Falcon.
Yep, they really did, Fletch. And when you drive it, the trim taut terrific really suits it because it is trim. It's, as you said, it's compact. They have a lot of bling on them, a lot of stainless. The taut and terrific to drive the car. They just don't have a rattle. They don't have a squeak. It's so tight in the suspension. The steering is so light compared to what had come before it. Lots of turns lock to lock, but just so light. In a car park, you can pretty much one finger on the wheel and around you go. So I think the trim taut and terrific really did suit the car.
Looking at the car, obviously the American derivative of where the first Falcon came from, and I can see American styling. And in the centre of the hood, with that piece of nice die cast, that's very Thunderbird.
It is very Thunderbird, Fletch, you're right, and I think it suits the front of the car amazingly well, but unfortunately on an XK it really shouldn't have that. So that one there is off a later model XM that the original owner thought would bling the car up a little bit more. It's on there now, it's going to stay.
Well, just like the panel industry, you smooth that over nicely, mate.
We try.
Let's talk at the back of the trunk on the boot there. Even the Ford, the embellishment or the badge there, custom line.
Yeah, very reminiscent of what's on the custom line. It's and in amazing condition on this car. They normally perish over time.
I love the steering wheel. There's something about a white steering wheel. I don't know what that is, but there's something very classy about that. We've got the 3 spokes, got the horn ring there as well. It's a nice wheel to look at. And of course, in centre there, Ford Falcon in script in the centre on the button there. That's beautiful. I love that.
It's one of the things I love on the old cars is I like the skinny wheel. I like the way it feels in your hand. Just classic and timeless.
And we look at the wheels, Darren. Still got the hubcaps with Ford written on them.
Mate, it is. It's they're just a classic look. I see a lot of them with mag wheels and things on it. I just think it's timeless and it's classic with the hubcaps on it, and that's the way it's going to stay.
Now, the interior of the car, I have to ask now, you mentioned off air, wasn't the original vinyl. To me, it's amazing when you look at the car, because unless Darren pointed that out, I would have thought that it was. Obviously, the original seat frames are still there. Will you look to the States to maybe try and get the vinyl from the era?
Yeah, look, I think my preference at the moment is I'm going to try and find a set of original seats in the original red and white colour scheme that the car should have in it. All the door trims, everything in the car is the original out of it, but unfortunately the seats during a period were out of the car and got damaged, so they had them retrimmed. So I think my first preference will be to find a very good pair of seats that suit the patina of the car. If we can't do that, then we'll look at bringing the material in and have them redone.
Tell us, when you're driving on your own, arm up on the door, wind going through your hair, how does it feel? What does it mean to you to drive a classic car?
Mate, look, on the roads around here, just cruising around all the back roads, it's relaxing. It's just a time out. It's all by yourself. Yeah, time to kick back and enjoy and watch the world go by.
The car is aging gracefully, Darren, isn't it?
It is. It is. It's just a stunning, to have original paint on the car in the condition that it's in. Yes, it's worn through in a few spots, but I think that's its character and its story, and it's just an amazing little car.
What's the difference between acrylic and baked enamel? Is the baked enamel the early version of what we call 2-pack today?
I guess it is, yeah. Ford always used baked enamel on their cars. They never had acrylic on them. So as you can see, it holds up extremely well. So its closest relative probably would be the modern 2-packs. Yeah, definitely.
There you go. Original baked enamel from 1960 on this little nimble Falcon. Darren, it's been wonderful catching up with you today, mate. I do appreciate the invitation out to your lovely place here, and congratulations on the find. It's one of those things where it's another bit of, as I said earlier, a bit of hidden treasure that's in your possession, and it's in a good home, it's in a great place. It's been a pleasure, mate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fletch. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here, mate.
Thank you very much. Cheers, mate.
If you own a classic bike, why not stay upright and stay with Shannons? Why not call Shannons now on 134646 or visit shannons.com.au. Well, it's time for a bike now, and it's a fairly rare one. Between 1975 and 1976, Suzuki made a bike that hosted a 500cc rotary engine. Now, back in this time, it almost sent Suzuki broke. The bike was more expensive for the rider to purchase, technically more difficult to work on, but they built 5,000 of them. And to tell us more, here is Ross Murray.
Yes, well, here we are again, just down here in the shed with my little helper here, who helps me restore motorcycles. The shed's a great place. Spent a lot of time down here, contrary to what the wife thinks. But anyway, it's a good place. I get a bit of peace and quiet down here. Have my own little fridge down here too. Haven't got a bed yet, but I'm working on that. But yeah, it's good. It's just something I do now that I'm retired. I can keep going with restoration of motorcycles, which I've done all for years and years. The shed can be quite untidy at times. It gets like that sort of thing. I'm one of these people that like to leave all the tools out while I'm working on the project and not put them away until I'm finished. But I know where they are, and that's the most important thing. I'd just like to let you know a little bit about the bike that we're looking at today. This is a Suzuki RE5 Rotary, which was produced in 1975 and 1976. And they're a bit of a rare bird, because when they were bought out, the energy crisis was on in the mid-70s, and these things chewed a bit of fuel, and also being rotary and being a bit exotic, they were a bit, they frightened a lot of guys off for riding them, and because they didn't think they'd be able to work on them because they didn't understand the principle of the rotary. And it isn't a simple thing, but if you do, once you've worked on one of them, you can sort of, you get the hang of things. So this bike is an Australian delivered Suzuki, which is a rare one. There weren't that many that came out here. Actual figures I don't really know, but there wouldn't have been any more than between 50 and 100 come to Australia in those years. I'm just having a guess there. There was 5,000 made worldwide, and they went to countries like the United States, England, Europe, Australia. Because they weren't successful, Suzuki cut production of them at the end of '76. You know, they've now become a bit of a collector's item because they were such a weird thing, you know. I had a bit of trouble with the engine when I got it, and a friend of mine helped me with it. He does Mazda Rotary cars, and he's a whiz on that, so we had to do a lot of stuff. Parts aren't available for these readily. You can get some bits and pieces, but they're just about run out now. A lot of stuff you have to make yourself. We had to actually get the side housings of the rotor resprayed with metal because the other part had worn out, and we've had to put new rings because Rotaries run side rings as well as rotor tip rings. So the side rings rub on a surface, and that's what controls the oil and etc. etc. So we've had to metal spray it and build it up to the original tolerance, and then put new rings in and run these rings in, which takes a fair while to run them into a new surface. They have a twin barrel carburettor. They have a primary and a secondary circuit in the carburation, and they also have two lots of ports in the housing of the rotor. One is for your primary circuit and one's for your secondary circuit. And they put out about 62 horsepower. They're quite a quick bike to ride, and they're very torquey in a motorcycle, unlike a car with the power to weight ratio in the Rotary bike is pretty good. You know, they're quite a good performing bike. It's taken me about 12 months to restore this bike. I do everything myself except painting, chroming, and a bit of the engine work, which was done by my friend who is a Rotary whiz. But it's all come together quite well, and yeah, I've been riding it now for the past couple of months. I also have another bike here which I'm doing for a friend. It's just a job I'm doing for him. He's into bikes too, but he loves old classic bikes like I do. And the one I'm doing now is a Kawasaki 350 Avenger, or an A7 they were known as. And they are a twin-cylinder two-stroke, 350 cc's, and they're rotary disc valve induction, which means the carburettors are on the side of the motor and not on the back of the fins or the intake side of the heads and barrels. It's in pretty good condition. It's complete. It just needs tidying up. It needs new seals because 50-year-old oil seals on the crankshaft are a bit of a worry, especially if you want to ride the thing. You're better off putting new seals in them so it doesn't let you down when you're riding them. And you know, the rest of the bike's just painted and back together again. The two bikes that I've got here now, the Kawasaki and the Suzuki, keep me busy, keep me on my toes, and give me something to do, and that's basically my shed.
Bikes have always been part of my life, so when it comes to insurance for a new bike or an older classic, Shannons is my choice. They're one of Australia's leading motorcycle insurance providers. With flexible cover for bikes that are laid up while being restored or on club registration. And cover for your daily ride too. If you're passionate about your bike, insure it with Shannons. Call Shannons on 13 46 46.
Darren Forbes Machinery House has been family owned and operated for over 85 years, and it's easy to see why. Planning on welding? Look at these welding tables and clamps, air compressors and different air tools, sandblasting cabinets, through to spray guns. Everyone is welcome at Machinery House. There are competitive freight rates around Australia, and you can buy online at machineryhouse.com.au. So remember, Darren Forbes has the range. Ross, how many years has it been since I was here last?
Oh, about 2011 or 12, I think it was. Yes, that was a long time ago now.
It's good to be back, and I look around and not a lot of things have really changed.
No, not really. You know, probably I have. I've gotten older and probably sillier.
I'm glad you have.
Well, we all have. We can't do much about it. It's inevitable.
Now, I think that the last time you'd restored a bike, you've always got something different going on here. This rotary bike here, it's the first one that I've seen. It's not a small bike. Now, you're a big guy. When you're on it, you're happy with the way that it runs in terms of performance?
Yeah, no, it goes good for its size. They weigh about 230 kilos, I think, dry. So, you know, they're fairly heavy, but they do go quite good for the actual engine that's in it. The power to weight ratio is fantastic.
You can imagine what they must have been thinking back in the 70s. The Rotaries were really making their place in cars. Like, look how good they were. The RX2s, the RX4s, the Mazda did a wonderful job there. With Suzuki, will we or won't we? A rotary engine for a motorcycle. It must have been a very interesting time for them.
Yeah, it was. They weren't the first to try it. The Europeans tried it before them, but they thought they'd have a go at it. They thought it was the way to go at the time. But unfortunately, it did cost them a lot of money to produce this bike, you know, and all the development that had to go into it. And they lost a lot of money, and it nearly sent them broke doing it. So that's why they had the short production run, and they weren't as popular as they thought. So people just weren't ready for this concept there and then in that time.
Kind of almost like rocket ship in some areas too. When you look at the aesthetics of the bike and the styling, everything's rounded.
That's right. Yeah. Well, they had an Italian designer design the bike itself as far as the bodywork goes. So they wanted everything to be round or cylindrical to sort of, hence the rotary thing. It's, you know, and that's what they did. So hence the cylindrical taillight and speedo and the round indicators and things like that. So. And
how cool is that shield that comes down and covers the speedo cluster?
Yeah, well, that's a pretty good thing. It was pretty trick back in '75, I can tell you. But it was to keep the sun off the instruments when you parked it, and then when you put the key in the ignition and turned it on, the screen flew forward and you rode so you could see the screen, obviously.
In terms of the rotary engine, you mentioned the restoration. Any problem areas with it? Like, did you ever get to a point where this is a difficult restoration, or did it flow fairly well?
Look, it flowed pretty well. The problem that we had was, as I said before, with the side covers. We had to redo those. We had to sort of metal spray them to get a new surface for the side rings to bear on. That was a bit tricky, but it was done by specialists. But we still had to give them the right tolerance to get it right, you know. So my friend that is a Mazda mechanic, he was very good, very handy in that respect. He did a great job. His name's Troy. He's a really good bloke, and he helped me out with that. And but that was the hardest part. Some things we had to make ourselves. A lot of the parts for these engines, the side rings and rotor tips, are the same as what's in the NSU R080 rotary vehicle, and they're pretty well the same dimensions. Only they are a 2-rotor motor, but the rotors are the same size. So we can get a lot of parts. You can source parts from NSU, which rings, etc., and rotor tip seals. That's not a problem. Yeah. So. Yeah.
How do we go rev-wise, Ross? Like conventional cycles with rods and pistons, they scream. So being a rotary, I know. Well, obviously with the cars, they always went really hard, and obviously reflecting the design of the engine. What's it like for a bike? What sort of revs are we talking?
Well, here I think the red line starts at about 6.5, but you can rev them to 7.5. I think they were just being a bit conservative. They didn't know they were treading in new ground when they did this years ago. So
I was scared things were going to spin off and spear off in different directions.
That's right. Suzuki and a lot of the manufacturers that had this new technology and new things, they were sort of trying to be pretty wary of what was going to happen and over-design things accordingly. So, but now you could rev them higher than that if you want to, but I don't. I mean, that's enough. It's great at that speed.
You're a fairly conservative sort of a guy, aren't you, Ross?
I don't know about that, am I?
Well, I tell you what, you've got to be careful of things spearing off. Now, years ago, when I was here at Ross's place, the swinging chair up in the garden, I was enjoying myself having a bit of a 5-minute break. The bolt came out. The thing fell. Fletchy's on the ground. The swinging chair collapsed.
I know, but we have fixed that since then. You know, that was a terrible thing to happen to you.
It was a lot to go through.
It was very traumatic for you, and I know you had counselling after it and everything, so hopefully the counselling has worked and you've come back again to how you were before.
Well, thank you, Ross. I'm looking forward to enjoying another couple of minutes on the chair very, very soon. Ross, thanks for your time. Wonderful catching up here at your lovely house west of Sydney. And just
I guess, showing us what is capable from a rotary motorcycle, a little bit about your shed, your man cave,
Yes.
which is, you mentioned the therapy side. I think a shed does a lot for a bloke, mate, and it's doing a lot for you. Good on you.
Yeah, thanks, Fletch. Good to see you again. Thanks, mate.
Well, that's a wrap. How cool is this episode of Classic Restos with Darren and his original XK Falcon from 1960? And of course then the workmanship from Ross Murray and his amazing 1975 Suzuki motorcycle hosting a rotary engine. As I say at the end of every episode of Classic Restos, no matter where you're watching the show from, until next week, please ride and drive safe. I'm Fletch, and I thank you very much for watching. You can like and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/ClassicRestosTV and watch catch-up episodes at shannons.com.au. Classic Restos is proudly brought to you by Shannons, insurance for motoring enthusiasts, Hare and Forbes Machinery House, and Pace Farm.